this is your chance to integrate an arts activity into one that comes from a core content area: science, social studies, math, language arts, reading. So we're going to walk through then step by step what it is you're going to do with this. As you're thinking about the lesson, you can think of one that you may have taught in an internship or when you were substituting, or one that you would like to teach or have seen taught, or something that you would just like to kind of make up and put together yourself. So you've got some options with that. And you don't have to worry about the NSU lesson plan template. We're not going to be that detailed on the lesson itself. You're going to provide us with a title of the lesson that's going to be about your lesson, not about the class. And then give us a grade level between grades 1 and 8. You're going to give us an academic standard, and you can always go to sde.ok.gov to access those standards. You're going to create 2 objectives, one for the core content area and one for the arts. You're going to give us some fairly detailed instructional procedures, but just the step-by-step part, not like what you would do if you were doing the NSU lesson plan template. And this is going to include why this experience supports the subject, this lesson. Why does your art support the students' learning? And then you're going to have some kind of an assessment. So I will show you some examples of some notes that I put together to do this. And that includes, so I went with a lesson that I have taught before, and it, not the movement part, but the 3rd grade social studies. Does Oklahoma have a pattern of rainfall? I would locate then my 2 Oklahoma academic standards, one from social studies and one from movement. And then I created 2 objectives. In doing this, I referred to Bloom's taxonomy. You can Google, you can find all kinds of examples of these. I found a document that I really like here. I like how this one shows how they step up from knowledge all the way up to evaluation. And one thing that I do ask you to do is use a verb that begins with at least the level of application. Don't do knowledge or comprehension, but start here. So you can use from any of these 4 areas. And I like how this list has that critical thinking. And then here's another way that they are organized. And again, we're looking at the application and above level for these. This one has more examples. And you can look through here and see which ones might be good fits for the arts. And there's another example here of how they're organized. So lots of different forms you can use for this. I Googled to see what, if there was an easy way to look at some of learning goals for art and see how that goes along with Bloom's taxonomy. And this was one example that I found that I thought was really interesting, starting at the top with remembering. And this one is, it doesn't align exactly with the other ones, but that's all right. So we've got our 6 traits here, but then over here we begin with concrete thinking and go into abstract thinking. So I like how they used these verbs in here, like discover, carry out, demonstrate. And then as we get into more abstract thinking, they're creating, they're deciding, and understand. That verb is a little bit tricky because we can't really observe, understand. We can observe products of it though. So we want to make sure that we select verbs that we can assess. My examples are for social studies, and this is from application. Students will apply Oklahoma's rainfall pattern by county to a state map. I would likely have students working in pairs or possibly groups of 3. Of course, that depends on the resources that I have, the classroom setup, those kind of things. Any students such as language learners who might need assistance and who might perform better in a group of 3 rather than just a pair. And what they would do with this is I would provide them with data by county, and then they would have to locate that on the map and plug it in, and then they would end up doing some coloring and determining, is there a pattern? And there is a rainfall pattern to Oklahoma, in case you didn't know that. So they would have to determine that, and then they would have to be able to state what the pattern is. Then the arts piece comes along with the next part, creating a series of movements that represents their understanding of Oklahoma's rainfall pattern. And this is where they are synthesizing their knowledge to create something. So this is a higher level even than apply. As I am putting my instructional procedures together, I would include information that a substitute teacher might need to be able to do this activity. And I like using bullets. I also sometimes use numbers. To me, it's easier to read than to put it all in a big block of paragraphing, but that's up to you. Just make sure that it's easy for me to read. And something that I would add to this, it's optional, it's not a requirement, but I would include a trade book. I might use Red Dirt Jessie by Oklahoma author Anna Myers, and I would talk about how that fits into it. And the students might actually want to use something from the book as they are creating their series of movements that is representative of the rainfall pattern. Again, that's optional. And I'll come back to the information page in a minute. Now for the assessment plan, I'm going to assess 2 different things. The first is going to be the social studies objective. I would develop or locate a simple rubric. I probably would have to create it with indicators for the % correct of the map. So I might start with 90% or above is worth 4 points. 80%, 80 to 89% correct is worth 3 points, that kind of thing. And then I would also, let's see, a partially correct description of the pattern. So they would have to write down their interpretation of the pattern, and that's something else that I would use with this simple rubric. So if I were doing this assignment, I would need to provide that rubric and make sure that the indicators are not too subjective. What I mean by that is, students did very well on this. Students did fairly well. Students did somewhat well, but missed a few, and those are subjective. If you can put it into numbers or percentages, then those take out the guesswork. And then for the arts, I would have, for this one, I would do a self-assessment checklist that would include a student reflection of 3 to 5 sentences at the end. So I would give them a checklist of maybe 3 or 4 elements, whatever I had required for them to include in their movement. And they would self-assess after they had presented it. And then they would also write a reflection of a few sentences that explains how their movements were representative. All right, so back to this. Make sure that in your instructional procedures, this is half of your overall score. That statement of where your lesson comes from is important, but this 30-point part is really explain to us what it is the students are going to do. This should be, I'm going to estimate around a half page or so. I'm not telling you it has to be that. I'm just trying to give you kind of a rough guideline there. And explain, why does this art experience support the subject or the lesson? For example, mine doing movement with the pattern of rainfall, by getting up and engaging their whole bodies in this concept, they are gaining an understanding of the pattern itself and they'll be able to remember it. They will be able to apply it more effectively. And I could even talk about how they might remember it and be able to apply it in things like what kind of animals do they like to hunt? So what kind of animals live where? Do they like to do boating and outside activities in the summer? If so, is the Panhandle the place to be? Let's see, sorry, I just kind of lost myself. Okay, how does it support this subject or lesson? Because third grade social studies has to do very, very explicitly with Oklahoma. So they are gaining more knowledge of the state, and they're able to represent it in a way that's not just doing a map. Yep, there's the pattern. Here it is. Okay, good job. I'm finished with that. Now they have that movement. We might also be able to use that later on in another activity. So say that we're still reading our book, Red Dirt Jessie. We might be able to apply some movement to that as well. And that's going to embed that understanding, help it be more ingrained in them. So you're going to explain that as part of your instructional procedure, and then your assessment plan. So for 20 points, you do need to provide some kind of an example. It might not necessarily be a whole complete rubric, but you might explain what some of the indicators are and how many different categories within. So for example, I said 4, that there were going to be 3 indicators, each worth 4 points, the highest amount being worth 4 points. You want to keep your assessments very simple to the degree that you can. You want to have something that you're able to refer back to, particularly if you have a parent or family person looking to see, why is my kid making a B? He's always made A's before. And you want to be able to have some support for that. And also as a reminder for yourself. So just an easy way to collect that assessment. I hope you enjoy figuring out a way to embed an art activity into a content area lesson.